All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're starting workshop number 2. Just like to thank Mac for doing his presentation from a TD perspective. We now have our BUC treasurer, Wederly Aguiar. He's a really good guy, good friend of mine, doing great things at union level. His presentation is steering the ship, and over to you, Wederly. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Mac, for your presentation. I gathered there were quite a lot of questions at the end of that still, and Mac's presentation, I guess, landed on what happens with financing and funds from the division level upwards. But we also could answer the same questions for what happens at the union level upwards. So yeah, maybe at the end of this presentation, if we do have some time and there's some time for questions and answers, we can touch on some of those topics as well as what is going to be presented today. So today, we've titled the presentation "Steering the Ship: Treasurers and the Art of Connected Leadership." Today isn't so much about technical training about how to do your jobs. I gather many of you have been in your roles for some time. If you're new to the role, absolutely call the conference when you can, get some help and some training with the technical aspects of your role. But here we're here today to talk about financial leadership in the context of local church structures, local church strategy, and expanding the impact that you can have in your local church. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this microphone because then I can turn around. So the aims of today, 3 main aims that we're going to look to achieve today: to establish the key responsibilities of treasurers and treasury teams in local churches. Now, you'll hear me a lot referring to treasurers in local churches. When I refer to treasurers, I know some churches have local treasurers and conference treasurers, and you might have, I'm referring to all treasurers. So there's no distinction. And increasingly, actually, as we move forward, there are so many processes and systems that now overlap between the 2 roles that actually we're moving towards a concept of treasury teams rather than distinct roles. So as I talk about treasurers, it is relevant to all treasurers in local churches. The next aim is to encourage an approach to budgeting that aligns financial resources with the mission and values of the local church. And finally, to foster an environment that builds confidence and trust in the local church finances through effective communication. So we're really going to be dealing with high-level strategic elements of the financial role you play in local churches. So just to start the ball rolling, let's do the easy stuff first. What is the role of a treasurer? Now, we could draw from all sorts of sources to talk about the role of treasurers, but we are working in an environment where we are treasurers of Seventh-day Adventist churches, so let's refer to the governing document that governs what we do, and that is the church manual. So in the church manual, there are certain roles that local church treasurers are meant to fulfill. Treasurers are the custodian of all funds: conference funds, Sabbath school funds, local church funds, auxiliary organizations. So the custodians means they need to look after and honor the purpose of those funds going forwards. They are there to safeguard the purpose of the fund. So when a member comes to you and says, I want to give a donation of £100 for Pathfinders, what do you do as a treasurer? Well, we make sure we honor that intention. Money for personal literature. This might refer to what you do with Stamber Press. And you might have other members in your church who do this, or it might be done through Treasury, but we make sure that we pay the Stamber Press bills and make the orders right and make sure that our members pay for those orders. That's part of the responsibilities of treasurers. Proper methods of payment of money by members. Historically, this would have been cash and checks. Now we're transitioning into a system where more and more people are paying by bank transfers or using other systems like PayPal or Stripe or other tools. Receipts to members. So this is a really important one. And I guess later on today you have a presentation on auditing, and they might touch on some internal controls, which are just the processes that help to protect the financial structures of your local church. And one of the internal controls that are really important is to always issue receipts to whoever hands you money. That creates a paper trail of the funding that goes through the system. Proper method of remitting funds to the conference. So you're responsible for ensuring that tithes and offerings collected at your church are duly passed on and reported to the North England Conference in this case. Preservation of financial documents. Books should be audited. So at the end of the year, when you've done your year, you can tick everything off and you're ready to have a local church audit. And then also relationships with members, making sure that the right things are kept confidential in the right spaces. Now, it's not just treasurers that have responsibilities that are outlined in the church manual. Church boards also have responsibilities. It's not a typo that we started on number 7. I just ignored the first 6 because, of course, number 7 is the most important. But one of the responsibilities of local churches are they have oversight of church finances. They are also in charge of protecting and caring for church properties. And I'll touch on this later in the presentation. The work of the board is to receive regular reports. The board should consider details of church business and receive regular reports of the treasurer on the church's finances. I promise it will get more interesting than this. We're getting the foundation stones out of the way. For those churches who are big enough, you might have a finance subcommittee. It's normally a subcommittee of your church board. You may not have one. That's okay if you don't. But then your church board fulfills this responsibility. The responsibility for this group is normally to review budget requests and to review the annual operating budget and to review the financial position in order to pass that information on to the church board. And then it goes a step further. The approval of the budget and the review of financial statements shall then be recommended to the church board and onward to the business meeting of the church for action. Now, who are these groups we're talking about here? The church board, as you know, is usually a group of 20, 30 people. I don't know, it changes from church to church. But they are responsible for the day-to-day decision-making of the church. But the business meeting is every member of the church. So finances touches on every single member in your church. And finally, General Financial Counsel. Also in the church manual, this is on page 147, handling of accounts for funds. The gathering and handling of funds for the Lord's work is a sacred responsibility. That's often a point we miss. Normally, as local church treasurers, we know we're there to do some debits and credits, issue receipts, and fill in reports. But the work we do is a sacred responsibility to ensure that the funding that goes to the system is properly accounted for, properly protected, properly treated, and honouring the intention of the donors and members who so faithfully give to the church. I'll skip to the last paragraph there. The treasurer of the local church works under the direction of the church board, and treasurers of any level, local church, conference, union, division, general conference, do not act independently. They disperse funds only by action or authority of responsible committees. Now, I'm the union treasurer. Does that mean I've got a nice little pocket of funds that I can just spend on whatever I like? Absolutely not. All the funds that are dispersed from the union in this case are done so with proper authority and authorization and approval at appropriate levels. Those are the basics. I promise it gets more interesting now. Let's make sure we have those foundation stones though. So, who's responsible for church finances? Church board, yep. Treasurer, yep. Yep, members, it really is everybody. And it's not a trick question. Who's responsible for church finances? Treasurers, absolutely. You're probably one of the key people who are responsible, but your treasury teams are also just as responsible. Finance committees, church boards, business meetings, pastors, everybody is responsible for church finances. Now, typically, as you go through the year, you will go through an annual cycle as church treasurers. And typically that will start with your budget process. So come 1st of January, hopefully you've already had a budget voted for the year ahead. You know exactly what you're planning for income for the year ahead. You know how you're going to spend it. You then go through the year issuing management accounts. And management accounts in this instance, what I'm referring to is reports to your church board. They are reports designed for decision making. And that's the kind of reports that your church board need. You also hopefully issue some other reports, maybe some notices in the bulletin a bulletin, other places, other communication, departmental reports, for example, could fall under reporting and analysis. Then you have, once you get to the end of the year, you're getting ready to be audited by your conference. And what's really important at the end is to review, follow up, and evaluate all the time. So where does the authority come from when we go through these processes? Where does the approval come from? When we are authorizing our church budgets at the beginning of the year, it's usually a finance subcommittee or the church board itself that will help to approve the church budget. The church budget is a really important document. It's a forward-looking document that says these are what we can expect for the year ahead. And as we go through, I'm going to try and dig down deeper into this, because it shouldn't just be what we're expecting. It can actually be used as a really important strategic tool to extend the mission of your local church. I mentioned before that management accounts are for your church board. They're there to inform decision-making, reporting analysis, bulletin announcements, business meetings for transparency, and then get ready to get audited, and everybody's responsible for the review. So this is what a typical budget process looks like, and let's see how many of you recognize this. Take last year's budget, make a few adjustments, cost of living, inflation, maybe a little bit of increased giving. Hey, you got a new budget. Does that sound familiar? It does. I think a lot of people do that. It ticks a box. It ticks a box. But what we want to dig down into today is maybe how can we make that box ticking exercise more valuable to your local church? Typical result of this, though, is that you end up at the end of it actually finding it quite difficult to find enough money to support the ministries of your church. I'm seeing some people say no. So maybe we have some really affluent churches here. This is very good. But it also creates a lack of wider buy-in, because the only people who are then involved with creating the budget is maybe the treasurer, maybe their team, maybe at some point the pastor gets a look in. But it doesn't create an environment to get buy-in from your wider congregation. And remember who's responsible for church finances. It is your wider congregation. The loop that you go through with the budgeting process, now the key word there is a loop. Because it's a loop, it's cyclical, which means you can join in this loop at any point. But typically as treasurers, so we're starting with the typical where we start, and we'll build on that. But typically as treasurers, we start the annual budgeting cycle with the budget itself. And there on the bottom left-hand side, you can see that the treasurer has developed the budget. From that, hopefully we attract some funds. Hopefully members in our church are still giving faithfully and generously. From that, we spend the resources we have available. And hopefully there, we're spending the resources in a way that we're meeting needs that we have identified. Hopefully we're satisfying those needs, but it's always important also to evaluate whether we did the best we could. And then the loop starts again. Now, I started off saying, remember, this is a loop. Just because we as treasurers tend to start down in this corner, it doesn't mean we have to. What about if we started on identifying the needs that we're trying to meet? What about if we started on, hey, you know what? Let's have a mind shift here. Let's evaluate what we've done in the past and see if it's still reasonable. The point of a loop is that you can join in the cycle at any point. And sometimes it's worthwhile just taking a step back and saying, you know what, instead of starting here just because it's routine to start here, maybe we need to find a way to improve the impact we can have through the budgeting process. So this is where the main section of today's presentation comes in, mission-based budgeting. Now, this is just a straight copy and paste from somewhere on Google. What is mission-based budgeting? A methodology that allows an institution's finance department to align costs with missional objectives, often used in clinical care, administration, research, and teaching. Now, it doesn't list churches there, but when we think about what we do as a church, doesn't mission underpin everything we do? And so when we think about our budgets on a year-to-year basis, shouldn't mission be underpinning the process that we do through the budget? So let's go into, now we're going to start digging in deeper into mission-based budgeting. In order to have a really strong, robust mission-based budgeting process, it is important to also have robust financial management processes. Now, over the past few decades, management philosophy has been shifting. And the reason it's been shifting is because if you think back a few decades, most management philosophy started coming up through the industrial times. So they really were geared towards factory setups. How do you get your factories to have more outputs, to produce more units? How do you get your people to work more efficiently? That's where the roots of management philosophy started. But of course, in the last few decades, we've been shifting as a society towards more service-led industries. And when we think about what we do as churches, we are more closely aligned to what we do as a service as opposed to a factory. We don't just get baptisms on the factory production line. We do provide services. So here are some of the shifts in management philosophy that have happened over the past couple of decades. Historically, management philosophy was dealt a lot with tactics, the how. How are we going to do this for the next 12 months? And the reason we determined the how is because we wanted to make sure we got stuff done. Think about your factory floor. We are going to put production line A right next to production line B because we want to minimize the time between production A and B. That's how we're going to make it happen. However, more recently, in the last couple of decades, we've shifted now towards, yes, the budget is still about the how, but it's based on what the prevailing strategy is at the time. The thing is, it doesn't just stop there, because let's say the strategy in your church is to say, we want to open a center of influence next year. And then your treasurer, let's use myself as an example, the mean treasurer comes in and says, no, sorry, we don't have money. Tough. That just stops the whole process, doesn't it? So it can't just stop in this loop. What it is the budget needs to act as the bridge between your strategy and the making things happen. And that's really where we have to focus our efforts as professional treasurers in your local church settings. You're a bridge between the prevailing strategy in place of your church, but also to make things happen. But it's important that through every step, we still have these feedback loops to assess how well we're doing that. Another shift in management philosophy. Commercially, companies used to create a product, had a brilliant idea. Take McVitie's, for example, biscuit company. Brilliant idea. We make a brilliant biscuit. We know everybody's going to love this biscuit. The digestive biscuit probably didn't change for a very, very, very long time. Rich tea, we can use rich tea. Didn't change for a long time. But then recently, the focus has shifted. It's like, yes, we still do create a great biscuit, but actually, do our customers still want that? Do they want more? So now you have chocolate-covered digestives and chocolate-flavored digestives and digestives with Oreos on top and who knows what else. So management philosophy has shifted from here's what we can supply to actually what is the demand out there and can we meet it? If we don't meet the needs of our community, someone else will. Now, we might think as a church that we don't operate in a competitive environment. But if we are not meeting the needs of our communities, somebody else will. And so we really need to also shift our philosophy to think about what is the demand in my local area, what is the demand around my congregation to try and make sure that we can fit it. Another shift, functionalism to recognizing interdependencies. Functionalism is simply, if you think you can have £1,000 of income or donations next month, how best can we streamline our costs to make sure we can maximize the use of that £1,000? Very functional, tangible way of thinking. However, these days in a service-led world, we recognize that there are interdependencies in all sorts of different things. Now, you could put probably a dozen different diagrams here, but this is the one I've gone for. Just go with me for a second. Look at that diagram, and the point here is that there is a link between our strategy, our people, our information, and our finance. We're unlikely as a church to be able to meet the needs of our community, let's call that strategy, without motivated members, let's call that our people, with access to the right training, information, and the right resources, finance. You could have weaker and stronger areas of this. Ideally, it's all strong. But really, if you have an amazing strategy to meet the needs of local communities, but you have no finance, no people, and no training behind it, it's not going to go anywhere. And this is the point. There is a very interconnected nature, meaning that we have to have all the different pieces of the puzzle in place to be able to fulfill strategy. Centralism to localism. I'm not going to spend too long on this one, but historically, companies were run with a very command and compliance structure. Boss says jump, you say how high. We've moved away from that as a society, and now we work towards building trust and commitment in other ways. This encourages innovation, it encourages engagement and fosters flexibility throughout other organizations. It should do so in the church as well. Also, we've moved away from confrontation to cooperation. I guess we still hear these stories, but, pastor wanted to do whatever, our treasurer just said no. Or treasurer's spending money on whatever, and pastor said he needed, whatever. This is confrontation. And as professional treasurers in your local setting, you need to get more and more engaged with the idea that it's not about controlling my little domain. It's about collaborating with your leadership to ensure that you have an effective strategy in your environment. Essentially, all these shifts probably boil down to building relationships. All these shifts mean that we are much more conscious of the things we need in place to have long-term strategy, long-term vision, and not just get through the next 12 months. So, sorry, that's come up at the wrong time. You'll see it in a second. So, embracing change. It is incredibly important. We live in a very, very fast-paced world. Change happens very quickly. It happens much more quickly now than it used to. Let's just look at a couple of business cases here. So Polaroid, who remembers Polaroid? Remember the snap and wave it around until your face comes up? Polaroid, they were a company who were very resistant to change. They were founded in 1937. At their peak in 1991, they were turning over £3 billion of revenue every year. Huge revenue. They had been well established for 50 years. Then within 10 years of their peak, they went from being market leaders to going bankrupt. So what happened? They simply resisted the fact that digital photography had come about as a new market disruptor. And so within 10 years, they went from being very successful to almost not there. The second one, BlackBerry, there we go. You saw ahead of time there for a minute. But BlackBerry, do you remember the BlackBerry devices with the QWERTY keyboards tapping around? Yeah, BlackBerry was slow to adapt. They were founded in 1984. Yeah, that would be well ahead of its time. 1984. They were market leaders because they were one of the first companies to develop truly smart devices. They were developing pages that had the capability of email. Can you imagine? But they were reluctant to innovate. And so they failed to keep up with the smartphone market that then came up soon after. BlackBerry still does exist as a company, but they had to pivot their value proposition, shall we call it. They had to pivot from making smartphones to selling cybersecurity and other services to businesses, but they are still around. Fast to adapt. Amazon have shifted the way consumers consume. One of their main tenets of how they make decisions is that they obsess, literally in quotes, obsess over their customers. That's one of the main tenets of what they do. And because they obsess over their customers, in their words, they feel they can keep up with the market and keep changing with the market and meeting needs of customers. Now, who ever heard of this one? This one I had to do a bit of research on. This one took me a while to find. Pets.com, anyone heard of it? No, I hadn't either. This took research. In 1998, Pets.com was founded as a company, as the name would suggest, to make pet supplies. In under 2 years of being founded, they secured themselves a slot at the Super Bowl in America. January 2000, they secured themselves a slot at the Super Bowl. At that point in time, their share price was worth $11 per share, right? I know that means nothing at this stage, but just pin that number, $11 per share. Within 11 months of that, though, that share price had plummeted to 19 cents per share, and they were declared bankrupt in the end of the year 2000. So within 2 years, they had a cycle of amazing down to nothing. So what happened? In the year before, 1999, they made an annual turnover, annual revenue, annual income of $619,000. Then in the year 2000, they spent $11.8 million on marketing. Now, how do you spend $11.8 million when you've only made $600,000 in the year before? So, okay, you might call it visionary, but what that lacked was a little bit of reflection, control, just a little bit of common sense, I guess. But that's what happened to that company. So, if you put this on a continuum, where do we want to be as a church? Answer's not hard. Yes, we need to be a church that still values its core beliefs, absolutely, but we also need to be able to adapt fast to the communities around us. Otherwise, we risk becoming irrelevant as a community of believers if we can't meet the needs of our communities. So how do you do that? Partner with key people. That's one of the main ways you can do it. Now, no one person can be everything at all times for all people, but we can partner with people. Now, as local church treasurers, strategy normally gets led by your pastoral, your eldership team. Hopefully, as treasurers, you are also involved in that. Because without the finance backing, strategy is hard to happen without finance. And so you really do need to be in that circle of trying to define strategy. Now, I'm going to put some traits, I guess, let's call them traits. I'm going to put some traits on the screen there, and you might be able to identify with some of those, you might not be able to identify with others. The point is, as we go through, just try to think about your own work as treasurers and think about any gaps that you might have in your work and who in your congregations actually might help you to fill those gaps. At the same time, also think, could you be one of these key partners for maybe the pastoral or the eldership teams as they also do their work? So co-pilot. Co-pilots align business and finance strategy. So once there is a prevailing strategy in place, co-pilots will help to shape that strategy. They help to deliver major change. They help to align strategy, value drivers, and performance measurement with the resources available in your setting. Maybe you're a navigator. Navigators help to identify trends, uncertainties. They find the opportunities in a situation. They find the threats, a SWOT analysis. They might be able to provide timely insights. Maybe you're a brand protector, protecting the value of the brand of your church in its community. You can ensure that decisions are sound and done on a good basis. You can be a leader in risk management. Or maybe you're a storyteller. Now, storytellers are important because as treasurers, we often can look at a spreadsheet, a CSV file, and see stuff in the numbers that, I don't know, maybe you have to have something wrong in your head to be able to see. But not everyone sees like us. And so you need the storytellers to translate what is going on in spreadsheets into a format, into a narrative that makes sense for other people. A digital and technology enabler, and I recognize we're not all digitally up to date. And when I look at some of the things that can be done with technology, I think, man, I need to find the people who can do this. But you need people who can use technology and understand technology to take advantage of it to help your church's cause. Process experts. So as churches, we're often very program oriented, and there's nothing wrong with that to a certain extent. But as we do our programs, they need to really be part of a wider process so that there's an aim, an outcome expected out of it. And as treasurers, you can help to define that process. We talk a lot in the church of the evangelism cycle, for example. And maybe the programs we do are part of that evangelism cycle, but you need people to be able to define where the programs are and projects are on that scale. And trusted professionals. I would hope that all treasurers are trusted professionals in their local churches. But the trusted professionals are the ones that can be that critical friend, that can be the ones to provide that friendly criticism, professional challenge in an objective, unbiased way. We'll move on. Here we go. So yeah, they're all on their screen. So you may identify with some of these, with none of them, with one or two. It doesn't matter. The point is, and you could put all sorts of other traits over here. The point is, we can't do everything ourselves. Neither can our pastors, neither can our elders, neither can our deacons and all the other ministries that work in our churches. It's really important that as we go forwards, you find the people to fill in the gaps that you have so that overall you get a sense of buy-in with the overall church. So working effectively with the leadership team. I'll just read through the list. Establish clear and regular communication channels. Understand your church's vision. Collaborate on budgeting. Be proactive in financial planning. Educate and empower. Balance financial realities with vision. Demonstrate financial transparency. Stay informed on your church's priorities. Be a team player and be present. Now, I know I just read through that list. I recognize that. But look, with all of that, if you are present, if you are there in trying to define your church's strategy, that is one key step in the role you can play in your local churches to ensure that it's not just strategy that sits somewhere airy-fairy in the clouds somewhere, but actually that strategy can be implemented at a local church level. With the bits coming up, we'll talk about how to get buy-in from your local church members, because that is really important to be able to make sure that strategy and vision is implemented. So, creating the vision. I'm not going to spend too long on this. There are all sorts of frameworks you can use. I'm sure we could set up entire modules on each of these. It doesn't really matter what framework, what strategic framework your church is using. Normally that will be led by the experiences and qualifications that might be around the table and for people who are discussing strategy. Hopefully, as I said, treasurers need to be part of these strategic meetings. So it's not really about the strategy. So what is it about? As treasurers, you are perfectly positioned to try and find the balance point. Remember the four scenarios we gave with those companies, some of which were successful and some were not. You're perfectly positioned to find that balance point of when does the vision actually stretch a little bit too far and actually become a little bit too unrealistic, or when do we need to maybe push a little bit and try and find ways to, hey, look, this is a good strategy, but wouldn't it be better if we pushed a little bit more? So as treasurers, you're there to kind of try to find the balance point between the vision, the mission, the objectives, the time frame, the finances available in your local church. And that is I don't think many people realize how valuable that is in any organization, to have people that can be trusted, who can analyze the situation and find that balance point in whatever the prevailing strategy is. But what I do want to focus on isn't so much creating the vision, because that's a whole seminar on its own. But once you have your vision in place, once you have the prevailing strategy of the church in place, how do you then go about getting buy-in? You'll recognize this bit from earlier, hopefully, if you're awake. If the budgeting process is the bridge between strategy and making things happen, that's not what sells the vision to your local church members. You may know that in your heads, and that's okay to know that. But what members want to know is the why. Why do we do what we do? Why is it that strategy that we think will be the most effective in our community? And it helps sometimes just to have a prompt here. It's just, you could use any prompts you like, but to have a clearly articulated sense of mission is important for your local church. So here we've got, we want to ... And that will change from church to church. It's not all the same. Not every single church has the same mission for their local contextualized congregation. So we want to ... so that ... Think about where you've been. Think about where you want to go, and think about how you want to get there. Now, here's a nice little tagline that we found. You all know Airbnb, right? Airbnb's mission is to create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. I mean, that would be nice to pin to the front door of all our churches, wouldn't it? It is important when you're trying to get buy-in from your members that they have something tangible to think about. I mean, it could be a mission statement. It doesn't have to be. It can be a vision. It could be a 5-point plan, 6-point plan. It doesn't matter what it is. But have something tangible, but always explain the why. Why do we do what we do? Here are some reasons why people give. Again, you could put all sorts of reasons here, but I think that the point is coming at the end. Why would people give? Maybe they're mission-driven people. Maybe they trust your organization. They get to see the impact. They have a personal connection with your cause. They want to be part of something. You've caught their attention, or they want the tax benefits. This isn't specific to the Adventist church. This is just generally why people give. But there is one important reason they don't give. Top reason why donors don't give is that they don't know how their gifts are being used, or they're not happy with it. So this is where we as local treasurers come in. This is really one of the things we want to deal with as local treasurers. It is incredibly important to be fully accountable and transparent with what we do in the church, because that accountability, that transparency builds a level of trust that means people, for whatever reason they want, and there will be others, whatever reason they want, they continue to be generous, continue to be faithful, because you are able to demonstrate that you, as a church, look after and take care of their money and take it seriously. But it's not just about money. If you have a prevailing strategy, you don't just want people to put money in the offering plate, you also want them to volunteer. You want them to buy into the strategy, give their time. So why do people volunteer? Again, there are all sorts of reasons. This isn't specific to the Adventist church, but maybe it's because they have a personal tie to the cause. Maybe they just want to have something on their CV. Set a good example, belong to a group. Maybe they want exciting opportunities. They want to do good. They want to stay healthy. Whatever the reasons people volunteer, you are very well placed in your local church to try and understand what drives your congregation. And different congregations will have different things that drive them. There are some congregations that are very community driven, others that may have other priorities that they want to do, but you're well placed to try to assess and define what drives your local church. And the funding that we spoke about before, if people are bought into it and willing to give their time, they're usually also willing to give generously and buy into the cause in that way. So creating buy-in, start with the why, craft your vision carefully and practice communicating it, and build up your trust account. I put trust account in speech marks there. That is just build up the perceived trust, not just perceived, the actual trust that people have in the treasury function in your local church. So this might be something, it's a very short example, but what does your local church budget look like? Does it look like something like this? List of income at the top, list of expenses, hopefully income and expense balance. It might look a bit different. Every church has a slightly different one, but the point is it's usually done very simply. So here's the question. What could a mission-based budget look like? Now, there isn't one answer to this, and this is where moving away from this presentation, just take some of these key concepts and try to be creative with how you apply them in your local church context. But here's one good example. In the research I was doing, base the presentation and communication on your missional framework. That's fine. Earlier on, I put up a whole bunch of possible strategic frameworks. One of them was called the 5 marks, I believe, or the 5-mark plan, something like that. This example comes from an Episcopal church, and the link is at the bottom here. I'll make sure that the copy of the presentation is with Michael later. But have a look at this link. It's a really, really good article about different ways that churches can budget. And one of the ways they suggest is mission-based budgeting. And they also have links to examples of how each of those budgeting styles could look like. So here's the first mark of this church's strategic plan. Mark 1, proclaim the good news of the kingdom. Now, usually when we're doing budgets as treasurers, they're very much Excel-based, very much text-based. But what they've done is they've tried to put, in a very graphic way, the kind of things that they want to achieve through Mark 1, complaining, not the Bible text. It's, I'm not sure what you call it, the Mark number 1. Proclaim the good news of the kingdom. But then it is also followed up by the numbers. It's not just a fancy design. And like I said before, when you're partnering with key people, I wouldn't know where to start to design something like that. I wouldn't know where to start. But hopefully you know in your congregation someone who can help you. But it does still follow on with the actual budget. This is how we're going to spend the resources of the church to meet that first mark. Mark 2, teach, baptize, and nurture new believers. Another fancy graphic. Followed up by, this is how we as a church are going to spend our resources to try and make sure we meet that second mark. And you get the idea. Mark 3, respond to human need by loving service. Followed up by the numbers. But essentially then, what you get is a nice little pack for your members, something tangible that they can see that explains what your strategic goal is in a way that isn't on a spreadsheet. I'm not saying this is exactly what you need to do in your local churches. What we need to do is just take some of these concepts and just apply a bit of creativity to something that is relevant to our church. And that will change from church to church. But as I said, do click on that link. There's a lot of good resources there. Now, I want to bring another angle to this as well. And this is often an angle that is completely missed in local church budgeting. And I made a quick reference to it right near the beginning of the presentation. A few weeks ago, I was at the Trans-European Division year-end meetings, and Anthony Wagner-Smith, he's a director there at the Trans-European Division, and he did a presentation on how we as an organisation use our local church buildings. Now, in the British Union, we've got around 400 congregations, probably half of which own their own buildings. Now, when you think about that, that is a huge asset base. And the question is, how do we maximize the use of those assets for mission? Now, one of the points of the presentation that Anthony Wagner-Smith was making is that religion is on the decline in Europe. If you might remember at the last census for England and Wales, For the first time in its history, England and Wales Christianity became a minority religion, so fewer than 50%. And it's not just in the UK, it is on the decline in a lot of Europe. So in parts of Europe where church buildings have had to be sold, well, they've been bought up by all sorts of different people. You've got this one church here that turned into a climbing wall. I believe that is a pub. There's some kind of art gallery. Yeah, they've been turned into all sorts of different things. But the point is, it's not the buildings that make the church. And historically, yes, these were the buildings were an important part of worship. But with religion on the decline in Europe, it is actually becoming an issue that we as an organization need to be preemptive about dealing with. Now, I'm not saying this is yet happening with any Adventist churches in the UK, but if that is happening in some parts of Europe, then we need to learn from that, hopefully. So, how many of your churches sit in this bottom left quadrant? So this is comparing the financial sustainability of our buildings with the mission effectiveness of our church. How many of our churches open for about 4 hours a week and then close the doors for the rest? Maybe a whole day on a Sabbath. But it means that for 6 days a week, many of our churches just stay closed. And so as you start developing in this role of local church treasurers, start thinking about how can we maximize the use of the asset. Remember, the church itself is a building. It doesn't make the church. The people make the church. So how do you use that asset to sustain your mission? So why financial leadership should include, but not only tithes and offerings and stewardship of church properties. Escalating operating costs and shrinking attendance. Now, we noticed this particularly through the COVID period. Through COVID, many of our churches had to close down by law. But actually, when we came back to those local churches, there was a lot of repairs and maintenance that had to be done because the buildings are pretty much sat abandoned for a few months. Not only that, but since then, because of the cost of living and the cost of the prices around in the economy, it has become very expensive to maintain our local buildings, local church buildings. There's also a change in generational giving patterns. In the past, generations would give because it was their duty to give. If you look at the younger generations, maybe from millennials down, millennials, Gen Zs, Gen Zs, all those, Mac will appreciate Gen Z, but yeah, I better say Gen Z. These younger generations are more inclined to give to projects than they are simply because it is their duty. And so we have to bear that in mind. There is a shift in generational thinking. There's also a cultural shift away from formal programs in sacred spaces. How many young people's groups have we got that are happy to just meet as a religious fellowship in any space? They don't feel they need the sanctuary to meet in. Church is church wherever you are. Properties must be missionally effective and financially sustainable, and it will bless the future of the mission both in Europe and throughout the global church. Now, let me give you an example of Stanborough Park Church. It's one of the biggest churches we have in the British Union. You may have heard of it, you may have seen it before, but that is a picture of Stanborough Park Church. The reason I know it quite well is because I did a stint as local church treasurer there, and the BBC office is right next door, so it helps. But Stanborough Park Church, it was founded in 1927, and then by 1962 it had to be extended because it had a growing membership. They added a balcony, they added some small extensions in the building. That lasted a while, but then in the year 2000 they had to do an additional extension. This time, though, it was driven by something different. Just notice the clock tower there in that picture. In the year 2000, they then extended the whole other side of that building, more or less doubled the space. But this time it was driven because their community engagement was so high that they needed the space to be able to accommodate the community engagement they had. Stanborough Park has always had very strong links with the local authority, with the community around it. Today, that side of the building over there is called the Stanborough Centre. They employ a centre manager who is responsible for taking bookings, for managing clients, and so on. And today, what they earn from that centre is actually contributes to the mission of the main church. So it contributes to the community programs they are running in the church. It contributes to their budget rather than the other way around. This isn't a cost centre for them. It's more an income centre. Now, this is one success story. And really what we're looking at is, well, With the trend going on around Europe, where religion is on the decline, churches are closing and being sold, what can we do with our churches, the things that we do own here, to maximize their use for mission? It's not about making money. It's not about, but it is just about contributing to mission. One of the things we're doing just checking the time. 10 minutes? Yeah? Okay. I'm just trying to leave some time for questions at the end. We're in the process of setting up a BUC asset management advisory. There are a lot of purposes for this advisory, and we're just in the final stages of having the group set up. But one of the things that we will eventually want this group to look at is the use of our assets as an organization. But you don't need to wait for this to start up to begin doing that in your own setting. If you are a treasurer in a local church where you do own your own building, have a think about, look, if we've got a spare hall there that needs redoing, but it's going to cost us several £1,000s, and we just don't have the several £1,000s we need in our budget. Well, look, within a few hires, that would pay for itself if you could find the right people to hire the space during the week, if your church is closed for 6 days a week, let's just say. Every church is different. I'm not saying that the model of Stanborough Church will work in every place. Every church is different. You have different communities, you have different needs. But as treasurers, just have a think about how can you maximize the use of the asset you have to support the mission and strategy of the church, of your local church. So all of this to say, mission-based budgeting is about dreaming big. You can, of course, continue to just tick the box. We did my budget this year. But actually, I think you are in a pivotal place in your local church that allows you to work with your leadership teams, to work with your membership, to dream big, to put structures in place that will help the long-term sustainability and viability of the local church. So just in summary, good financial management, partner with key people, find your strategic framework, create a vision, and get buy-in. These are the tenets of mission-based budgeting. Now, just moving on, I just need to check how much time I have. I'm still trying to leave time for questions. Of course, you need to build a budget and create a budget for your local church, but it's not enough just to have a budget and put it on someone's lap. You need to also build confidence. Building confidence, there are all sorts of management models out there that will help with this. One that you may frequently see in our organization is this one, where building confidence is a kind of three-way split between having good organizational culture, and that means setting a good tone from the top. So you need to have a leadership team that sets a good tone. Organizational controls, so people trust the processes of the finance departments that you work in. They trust the process when they believe there are enough controls to safeguard the finances of the church. But the one I want to concentrate on is probably organizational communication. Communication as an organization is probably one of the things that are maybe one of the weakest areas, not just in local churches, right through the system, even at the union. One of probably the weakest areas we do in treasury, because we get on with the debits and credits. We like to just get our job done. But one of our weakest areas is that we don't really do enough communicating out to local churches. Say, hey, did you know this is what we do? These are the services we provide at the union for you as churches. This is what we do for the church to extend mission. I'm just using the union as an example, but think about your own roles as well. Probably as local church treasurers, maybe we could do a bit more communicating to help the members in our churches understand what we do in treasury departments. How to build trust. Again, you could put all sorts of lists here, but value long-term relationships, be honest, honor your commitments, admit when you're wrong, communicate effectively, be helpful, show people that you care, stand up for what's right, be transparent, and so on. We could put another half dozen points there. But in our context specifically, how do you build trust as local church treasurers? Now, if we were to put two axes there, the first one, the horizontal one, being an axis going from not trustworthy to trustworthy. This is about the reality of what we do. Are our processes strong enough to demonstrate that that the reports we give are trustworthy reports? Now, the vertical axis is more about people's perception. Do people perceive the treasury function in your church as a function not to be trusted, or do they perceive it as a function that can be trusted? Now let's just start down the bottom left-hand side. This is the bit you don't want to be in. This is the quadrant you don't want to be in. If you have insufficient records, and also you don't report to your church board, to your local church members, etc., you are likely to be perceived as not trustworthy and not trusted. That's not a good quadrant to be in. On the other hand, you might have really good records, but because you don't report frequently to your local church or to your church board or whoever needs to know the information, you may be trustworthy, but you still don't come across as trusted. On the other hand, up here in the top left-hand quadrant, you may report regularly to your local church, but what if those reports are based on bad information because you have inaccurate records? Still not a good place to be. So really the quadrant you want to be in is the top right-hand side. You want to make sure that your records are sound, but also that you report willingly, consistently, and openly all the time. Now, as the very basics of reporting, every time your church board meets, as the treasurer, you really need to give them at least this basic information. You need to give them information about the budget, about your balance sheet. Now, what's your balance sheet? It's about the assets you own and the liabilities you owe. So that will include bank balances. It could include cash in your safe. It could also include, if you've had a church building loan from your conference, maybe you include that liability or how much is left of the balance to pay to your conference for that loan. But also include information about your income and expenses as so far in the year. So this is how much we've collected in local church budget offerings, this is how we spent the money, and this is the balance so far. This is kind of minimum reporting. What we want to do today is say, well, if that's the minimum, that's okay. We can do that. We can tick the box again. But how do we elevate that to the next level? So this is where we start having to put our creative hats back on. And you know what? People don't think treasury people are creative. Let me tell you, treasury people are very creative. When you're faced with a problem that says, how on earth am I going to balance that budget? Treasury people find a way to balance the budget. We are very creative people, but we just need to apply that creativity in other ways, and especially in this section in communication. So to make financial reports worth reading, have a think about what is the purpose of the report. Now, generally speaking, if you're doing it to a church board, your main purpose will be to help the church board make business decisions to drive improvement. Is that a fair purpose for those reports? So while you're structuring your reports, it's not just about listing income expenses, it's what information can you give to your church board to help them make good decisions. The other thing is you need to understand your audience. Who is the report for? What information do they need? How experienced are they at reading the data? If you have a very experienced group reading the data, you can go into more detail and more granular level of information. But if your audience isn't as experienced, then maybe you need to focus more on the charts and graphs, still provide some of the hard numbers as well, but just have a think about who your audience is and what level of experience they have in reading financial information. How often do they need the financial information? What data or facts do they need? Now, I am running out of time, so I'm going to speed through this one. There we go. Lots of speeding. That's it. So, deciding what to report. So, use strategic objectives to drive your reports. Reports should be appropriate to the level of the team and decision-making that you're reporting to, and ensure that separate reports are interconnected. All this means is, when you're reporting financial information to your church board, you're probably reporting at this level. It may look different to the kind of report you're reporting to your youth department or your Pathfinder director or anything else, and that's okay. As long as when your ministry leader looks at that financial report, they need to be able to recognize how that feeds into the church board report as well. So just have a think about how you structure your reports. It will be different reports for different levels. But with a bit of creativity, you can make sure that the reports are fit for purpose. Also accommodate different thinking styles. Now, again, you can put any personality assessment model you like here. There's one I like from Bramson, and I think the reason I like it is just the title of it, Coping with Difficult Bosses. I'm not going to go into each of those because we are running out of time, but in your spare time you can read about this. But you can plug in any personality type model you like here. The point is, people think in different ways. And with your financial reporting, you need to be able to target all those different ways of thinking to make sure your reports are as easily accessible as possible. So, in strategy, identify strategic goals or business objectives. So you may want to think about your local church reports that actually list your strategic objectives at the top, because then you're linking what's happening in your finances to the strategic objectives that you have in your church. Keep it simple. Show performance visually. So you try to use charts and graphs. Charts and graphs are a quick way for people to absorb financial information. If needed, do provide some supporting analysis. There are some very detail-oriented people out there, so it's not often enough just to show the fancy, colourful graph. You also need to back that up with some numbers. And add commentary. Some people respond much better when you have a narrative section, or even if you just have a sentence just explaining some of the key figures or some of the key variances. Some people prefer to see the narrative in the financial report. And then only present information that will guide decisions. There needs to be a purpose for the information you present. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read all this. This is just an example of what a report could look like. It doesn't have to look like this for every church. You really do need to tailor the report for the needs in your context. One way to do this is just to listen. When you're in a church board, if you keep getting a recurring question, hey, that's probably something they care about. So try and put some information in your financial report to deal with the kind of recurring questions that you might get on your church board. The one on your left, as you can see, is page 1 of 4, so there are 3 more pages behind it, but it's just a visual representation of some of the financial information for a church board. The one on the right is a quarterly bulletin insert to keep church members involved. And you can see that it maybe goes into information in a more summary level, but it helps that transparency and that openness that people perceive from the Treasury Department. What does a well-functioning Treasury team look like? You can see I'm speeding through this now. Maybe I need more time. Okay. A well-functioning Treasury team regularly presents financial reports. They inform the relevant people and committees of exceptional issues. We as treasurers are good at recording information. Sometimes there are exceptional issues that need to be identified, and it's important that we do so at the right times and to the right people. Use our resources with authorization effectively and efficiently. Make recommendations to benefit the church, and regularly review internal controls. Earlier this year, we launched our first phase of ACMS Treasury module. That's Adventist Church Management System. If any of you have interacted with church clerks, you will have heard this before. Church clerks use ACMS. But the Treasury module is something we are starting to adopt now. Back in 2022, the South England Conference did a pilot implementation of ACMS Treasury module in a couple of their churches. It was successful. Earlier on this year in May, we did a first phase implementation from the North England Conference. There were, I believe, 5 churches at that implementation. So 5 churches at the North England Conference have already been migrated onto this system. They were part of a group of 25 churches across the 2 conferences and the 3 missions to be in the first phase of this implementation. What is it? The ACMS Treasury module is going to be the tool for local church treasurers to record tithes, offerings, financial transactions for their local church. And the reason it's coming in, one of the principal reasons, there are all sorts of reasons, but one of the main ones, it's the first system we found that ties together the work of your church clerk, of your local church treasurer, and of the member. And this is where the member comes in. Just up below it, I've written there the 7Me app. This app is available in the App Store or on the Android and the Google Play Store. We did discover yesterday that only iPhone users are going to heaven, so sorry to everyone else, but it is still available for Android users. Do download it. It is functional. However, we are at the early stages of implementation. There are some teething issues we are still working through. If I can just use the church clerks as an example, back in 2017, they brought in the ACMS membership module for church clerks. They also went through the same transition. They had teething issues at the beginning, but because the UK came in at that point, the UK's membership requirements served to shape ACMS into the system it is today. And we are now coming in as treasurers at the same, more or less the same point. ACMS Treasury module has been used in the South America division extensively. It is their only system that they use, so it is tried and tested. However, we're at the beginning of stage of rolling the same system out to the whole world. The General Conference has endorsed this as an official system. But we are one of the first countries to now implement that in our context. What it gives us the opportunity to do, though, is shape the Treasury module into something that works for the UK. It still has to work for the rest of the world, but it gives us the same advantage that the church clerks had a few years ago when they were doing it. But now the Treasury module is for treasurers. During 2024, we are going to go through to the second stage of implementation. If you want your church to be part of that, please contact Michael and he will add you to the list. It is going to be a really, really major, it's going to have a major impact in the way we do church, but in the long run, it will provide a huge level of benefits, not only for your local church, because it means that if once your church is on this, your members will very easily be able to see the finances of your local church through the app. But it also allows members to give tithe and offerings and so on. The app itself does have a prayer section, it has a calendar section, it has a resource section. As I said, download it, have a play. Remember, we are still working through some of the teething issues, but by 2024, when we do phase 2, most of those will be resolved. So it'll be really brilliant to get a large chunk of the NEC churches on there. I won't talk too much more about that. So if you remember, the aims for today were to establish the key responsibilities. We did a section on the church manual for that. To encourage an approach to budgeting that aligns financial resources with the mission and values of the local church. And like I said, today wasn't really about technical training. It's more about understanding the concept that the budgeting processes we go through as a local church can really be used to make sure that the vision and the strategy of the local church has a big impact. And then finally, to foster an environment that builds confidence and trust in local church finances through effective communication. There was a lot packed in today, and I know I spoke very fast, and thank you for bearing with me. But just before we go on, it's one of these things that perhaps you don't hear enough, but at conferences, at unions, I don't think members and church treasurers in particular realize how much we appreciate the work you do. You do a huge amount of work in the background, often a thankless task, and believe me, although we probably don't say it enough, maybe that's where we need to communicate better. But maybe we don't say it enough, but the work you do is incredibly appreciated, both by, I'm sure, Michael's office and certainly by the British Union Conference. And we do, when we report tithe figures at executive committees, it is one of the things that always comes out, that we are incredibly grateful for the faithfulness and generosity shown by all members and then for the work that you guys do to make the whole system work well. So just to close, a Bible text, Philippians 4:8. I'm sure you've heard this one before. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And if I may add, whatever is excellent and praiseworthy, think about, budget for, and report on such things. Thank you. Do we have time for Q&A?
I just want to say thank you, Wederly, for your presentation. I'm sure everybody has been more informed. We do have time for a few questions. So yes, if there are any questions, please raise your hand, and then I'm sure we'll try and answer.
Yep.
Just my mouth was big enough, Brother Michael. Yeah, what happens, what's been happening for years now in my church, it's a small church. Every time I give receipt in the envelope, next week or next month, I get that same envelope back with the same receipt in. So what I've resorted to do is just to leave the receipts in the book, and then the rows that's not filled in, I just tear that receipt out and send to the conference with the report that I return. Is that a good way to go, or what would you say?
Okay, that's a great question. Actually, we've seen this before in other churches. So as local church treasurers, we did mention in the presentation, it is incredibly important that you do issue a receipt at all times. And the reason we need to issue a receipt is to protect you as a local church treasurer. What happens if someone puts £20 in the envelope, you don't issue a receipt, and they come back to you and say, no, and then you count it and you only find £10? what happens at that stage? So internal controls are important. One of the internal controls is issuing receipts. Now, just because you issue a receipt, does the member have to take it? Maybe that's where the problem comes in. You're absolutely right. For receipts that don't actually go out, have them sent somewhere. And if that is to your conference, that's fine. Do so, because there needs to be a paper trail somewhere of that receipt. Hopefully, you can encourage your members to actually take the receipts. That would be the ideal scenario. But if they don't, do send them somewhere.
No, I'm saying that the receipt that I should have given to members, I've resorted to just leave them in the record book. I just leave it in the record book. So even though I might have 4, 5, 6 record books there that's used up, at least if I'm contacted at a later date, they're all in the book.
There is a record of the receipt.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's what I've done.
Did Michael want to say something?
I was just going to say it's really important to make sure that receipt has been written, and you know where that is. If you can see there's a trend that people are not taking it. Reason why I say that there are cases where things that are reported to the conference is different to what's into the receipt book, and things that we've had to deal with. So it's vitally important that information is there. Okay. We have a question at the back. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get the mic to you, but if you can come closer, because we are recording, you see, so it would be good just to capture the question as well.
There are people that actually come to our church. Well, actually, they don't attend our church, but they pay money into our bank account. There are people. Well, there is a they don't actually attend our church, but they pay money into our bank account, and they've said that they don't actually want a receipt. So.
Okay, with bank transfers, because there are two sides of the transactions that both the individual who donates will be able to see on their bank statement, and you'll be able to see on your bank record, I would still encourage you to issue a receipt no matter what way it comes in. However, if you are unable to issue a receipt because of the bank transaction, you do have a transaction trail there.
So when you say issue a receipt, so they pay money into our account, and we just email the receipt through, because we do it through ChurchPal. Just give them one, despite the fact they say they don't want it.
Yeah, I think it's the same answer as we gave before. Still write the receipt and record it somewhere. Either return it to the conference when you're returning your monthly remittances, or just leave it in the book. But it's still write the receipt. If you are sending receipts by email, obviously once you send the email, you've sent the email. One of the things the ACMS Treasury module and 7Me app deal with is that if members, once you're recording transactions through there, the receipts will all be generated on the system itself, and those who do use the app will be able to see their receipts of giving if necessary. But yeah, to answer your question directly, try to give people receipts. If they don't want the receipts, it's okay. You do have a transaction trail in that instance.
Should I send the receipt to the conference as opposed to put the conference email address then? Is that what you're saying?
No, just leave it in the receipt book. Leave it in the receipt book.
It's not book though, it's an email.
It's a ChurchPal. Yeah.
Which means I'm not actually issuing a receipt then.
If you're using ChurchPal, then you've recorded the transaction. You wouldn't issue the receipt. Yeah, still try. As I said, encourage your members to take receipts. But yes, if you're using ChurchPal, it would just be recorded.
Thank you. Good evening. We had a situation at our church where somebody wanted to make a very substantial donation to the church, but they didn't want it to be paid into the church's account for them to be receipted, and they only wanted to deal directly with the elder of the church in telling the elder how they wanted the money to be spent. So that was done, and then afterwards I found out it had happened. So I didn't know what to...
Yeah, we do come across quite a number of strange requests sometimes. I think the answer is the same one: encourage people to do things through the proper processes. And one of the reasons to do that is, and it doesn't always happen, it's not always the case, but treasury departments should be one of the most trusted departments of the church. And so if someone that does have a donation they want to make that they do want to keep contained and don't want to say out wide, there are lots of things like that. But really, the Treasury Department needs to be one of those departments that is trusted to be able to handle that information. You'll have noticed in the church manual that one of the key roles of treasurers is to maintain confidentiality where that is appropriate. So again, we know these things happen sometimes, but do try to portray the Treasury Department, not just portray, be a department that can be fully trusted in your church. And sometimes it does take some conversations and some encouraging to your members as well. There's a question. Yeah, Mike, you'll have to tell me when to stop. There's one more question in the middle there.
Are we not able to issue receipts anonymously if people do not want their names to be recorded? So we could do a receipt saying anonymous donation, and that would cover some of the situations that we've been given. So then nobody's name needs to be recorded. The amount is recorded, and it's still receipted and put through the books and audited.
Yeah, no, that would be okay to record an anonymous donation. Still try to give it to the donor if you know who the donor is. So still try to give them a receipt so they have something as well. But yes, you can record anonymous donations, yes.
So another question is that if someone normally pays a certain amount in their tithe, and then they actually 1 month they give a huge amount as tithe, it's a totally very large amount that's unusual, I would say. I mean, we're trained at work as if you see something unusual, we're supposed to highlight it. I mean, but I didn't. I did actually speak to someone at the conference, and they said just basically, essentially ignore it. Would that be right?
Okay, yeah. Again, we do come across a lot of different scenarios. As accountants, we are, and finance professionals, we are taught to have a level of professional skepticism. Now, where you do have funny scenarios where you look, hang on a minute, it looks like they added an extra zero, it may be worth a conversation with that member. Just say, look, was this correct? It is a judgment call at the end of the day, but try to use your judgment in the best possible way, not just to make sure we record things properly, but also to increase this level of trust that people have in the way we do treasury in local churches. There could have been legitimate reasons for it, absolutely, and that's why just do a check if you're able to, if you feel able to, just do a check. As long as it's legitimate, it's fine.
Okay, I think we have a couple of minutes left. Well, it's just one question. So I see that a lot of the times from a treasury perspective, you're on that management level and stuff. In terms of engaging with elders, the pastors, in terms of trying to make that strategic shift in terms, and so then it's a collaborative effort in terms of doing the budget, and you're focusing on different things. I'm sure there are people out here that are treasurers here that are very strategic in their mind, but trying to transfer that information and share that information with your elders, your church board, it may be challenging. Could you probably just express or probably share this, and probably just in an everyday way, just how to engage that kind of process and enter that type of conversation, so then when you are doing your budget, it can be a bit more mission focused rather than making sure you can just pay your cleaning and your energy bills?
No, that is a great question. Actually, there's whole books and topics and seminars dedicated to the topic of communicating well strategically with leadership. I think the word I use there is probably the key one, communication. It starts with you. Do talk to your pastor, do talk to your elders. There will very often be in local churches 2 or 3 key people who if you speak with them, they can make things happen. It'll be different in each church, but talk to those key people. Talk to those elders that are key people, or your pastor, and say, look, I've got some great ideas. I'd love to be part of the solution to bring some strategy to church, but always do it in a way that you're willing to collaborate widely. We're not there to push our own version of strategy onto anyone. Neither should those leadership teams. It is a very, very much collaborative approach that you need to go to, but it starts with you. I think the point I was making in here is, do start that conversation, do approach those key people and start those conversations of being involved in the strategic process of the church.
Then my final question, let me ask this one question, I'll come to you, and then that will be the final question. Sometimes we do our budget on an annual basis, and I will say sometimes that may be thinking to the tip of our noses. But what about 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? We heard Matt say this morning about using tithe funds and what we can't use tithe funds for, and for example, building a building. How do we engage that type of conversation, that type of process for the 3 to 5 year, maybe even 10-year plan to get your church from A to B, which could be included buying a building for mission purposes?
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. That's a really, really great question. Just make it known. Lots of people, when you're dealing with long-term projects, and this could be strategic in nature, you want to build a center of influence, or it could be, you have a church building project that you want to fund, or whatever it might be, whatever the strategy might be. People appreciate being able to see the vision for what's happening in 10 years' time, but don't neglect to show the next steps. The next steps is very often the 12-month budget. But in that 12-month budget, there's no reason you can't say to them, look, in 10 years' time, in 2030, in 2033, this is where we'd like to be as a church, and you can help us get there. But for the next 12 months, this is our budget. But yeah, communicate it.
We have one final question.
At the beginning of your presentation, you said that the treasurers are the custodian of all the funds for the church. Is there any scenarios where that would be an exception for the union or the conference to give church funds anywhere else?
Just define for me what you mean by church funds.
Church funds, so there's an evangelistic campaign going on and the funds don't come into the church account. They get sent somewhere else.
Right, let me just start with the concept level. And this maybe goes back to what Mac was speaking about. Different levels of the organisation will have a remit to financially manage levels of funding at different levels. Some of that remit is at local churches, and that generally is local church budget offerings. Some of that remit is at conferences. One of the biggest parts of the conference remit is to make sure there is sufficient pastoral support in local churches. So the first question I was asked is, whose remit is it to disperse the funds? And then the second one is, do they have appropriate approval to be able to do so? And the approval can come through the budgeting process. It can come through additional actions taken at church boards or executive committees and so on. But it's those two questions. Whose remit is it under, and do they have the appropriate approval to do so? If those are met, generally speaking, the funds will flow through.
Flow through to any account?
So whatever has been approved.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Wederly. We are going to close there. We are going to take I think it's about a 12-minute break, and then we'll be moving on to auditing. So actually, can you just come and pray? Because I didn't pray to close the last session, and that was really bad of me. So would you want to come and pray for us, please? Yeah, you've asked so many questions, so I think we want to hear your voice a little bit more. Oh, you can't do that. You can't do that.
Okay, all right. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we are truly thankful to you that one more time you have shown your goodness to us. Father, you have been with us from morning until close of Sabbath. Lord, we, as promised, we did not take time out to say our appreciation. And Lord, we are sorry about that, and we pray, Lord, that indeed your mercies will continue with us. Thank you, Lord, for the blessings thus far this day that has passed and gone into eternity now. And so, Lord, we just pray that you'll continue to bless all of our leaders. Lord, let it be that the vision will continue. Father, let it be that the membership will be inspired to continue to do the work that they do. And so, Father, for the remainder of this new day that started now and the remainder of the meeting that is ongoing, Lord, we pray your Spirit's presence will continue with us. And Lord, let it be that at the end of all of this, our church conference union will be a much better run place where we can have better discussions, better vision, better plans. Thank you, Lord, for hearing us and for blessing us to this end. Amen.
Thank you.